All right, so I'm going to try this again. I'm going to start in the same spot. I'm going to start right here at 0, 2. So x is 0, y is 2. But this time I'm going to assume that rather than going from the low, as it passes through here, being symmetric in in the y direction with respect to x, that this goes to that. And I'm going to assume that you go through this way, so that the far away one goes to the close one, and then the close one in here goes to the far away one. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to start off on the same spot, moving in the same direction, but uh, we'll go around the curve a little differently, just because I couldn't really tell what was going on there. So starting here, I'm looking at x now. I'm going to increase up to that point up at 2.5. So it goes up to 2.5 like it did before. It then comes down to -1 like it did before. It comes down to here around -1. And it goes back up to about 2. Back up to about 2. It goes, I lost it already. Up to about 2. And it comes way down to like -3. Way down to -3. It comes up to about 1.5. And then it drops down. This is where we're doing something different here. Now I'm going to drop all the way down this way to -2.5, and then up to about +1. About +1. All right, I've already lost it. Here we go. 0, up to 1, down, sorry, up to 2.5, down to -1, up to 2, down to -3, up to 1.5, down to -2.5, up to 1, down to -2, up to 3, down to -1.5, and back to where we started. Okay, what does this look like to me? It actually feels kind of cosine-y. The ends are always tricky. Um, that this curve is, that one, and this curve is this one, so that midpoint is, you know, is here. So that looks like a cosine curve. So that feels like x equals cosine t, and it's starting off down below here, so it's like maybe a minus cosine of, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe minus cosine 5t. And they look like pretty big bumps. I'm gonna try the, you gotta add up to 3 at some point, so I'm gonna try this. I'm not entirely happy with it, but let's see, that's the x. Let's try typing that into x. So I've got cosine t minus 2 cosine t. There's no way this is right. Sorry, cosine, that should be a 5t. Let me submit it and see what it thinks. I'm thinking here. I'm looking. I'm thinking. None of this looks good. Um, all right. So I don't like this. This is even worse than before. So what I think I'm going to try to do is go back to the one that I had, and rather than starting here, I did notice there was a nice spot there, right? That spot was when we were back to here again, and it was this rather than going, I started essentially in the middle of going from the low here up to the high there. But this one is when I'm going from essentially going backwards through it from this high down to zero, down to that low. So what if I were to start all over again using that right there as my zero? Okay. So essentially I'm going to take this part of the curve and put it over on the end there. So it just wraps around. I still see it's still the same flow, main flow, but the wiggles look a little different. See, this now looks like, well, there's two sine curves for my main flow, but it starts out then upside down on that wiggle. So that feels to me like I've got a sine of 2t, because there's two sine curves for my main flow. And then I'm going to do minus 2 sine. And how many did we say? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5t. All right, and actually I'm going to submit that right now just to see something here. Now it's not what they're looking for, but what I see starting at 0, I'm dropping down first. I'm going up to about 3. I'm kind of comparing it with the y values there. That looks great. And then it drops down to here, which is that right there. So we started here, we went down, we went up, we went down. Actually, this feels good because it's going to come back up to here, yes, to here. That feels good. It's saying wrong, but that feels like, it may just be flying the opposite direction. Or you started here, went that way, they may be going this way. Essentially flying along the curve in the opposite direction. So I'm going to take that, and now let's do y. Well, when I figure out where is the y value there, you're up at 2 again. So this is like, we're back up here at 2. Right, so this spot, and when I draw that in, it's like, ooh, look at that. That looks like the main flow is going right through that. It looks like a sine curve now. So this looks like a sine curve, actually an upside down sine curve because it starts off going downhill. So let's call this y equals, there's a minus sine t. And again, the wiggles, just like up here, the wiggles seem really big compared to the whole up and down of the whole thing. So I'm going to call this just a 1, and I'll put a 2 on the wiggle. And the wiggle looks like a cosine curve. If I was calling that 0, with the main flow going through here, the wiggle is up above it. So that's starting up there and then down. So this is like a 2 times a cosine of something. And I see 1, 2, 3, 4 cycles. So it looks like a cosine of 4t there. So let's try that. I've got a minus sine t plus 2 cosine 4t. And submit. All right, all right. It is right. Now it's calling them both wrong because it's looking for a particular answer. They were flying in opposite direction. I'll show what they have in a moment. But this I will count as correct. If your graph, if your red graph covers the blue graph that's there, you are correct. Okay. Um, if I look at what answer they show, they've got a sine t plus 2 sine 5t, or I had a sine 2t minus. Huh. And then just comparing their answer here, sine plus, yeah. So they're flying backwards from what we are, somehow. But that's irrelevant. Um, if you find things that work, then it's correct. Even if that says wrong, if the red graph and the blue graph show the same, then it is correct. So there's a lot of different ways to attempt these things. Some of them, you know, that don't seem to work, but then it's like, well, is there another way, another starting point? On this one, there was just an interpretation of where am I actually flying. My original guess was right, but it took a little bit of finding a better starting point to get these curves to work, to get these equations to work. Anyway, it's a process. You gotta experiment. You gotta let one failed attempt help you analyze to find the next correct attempt. Right? Anyway, keep asking questions. I will continue to answer them. Thanks.